Having a shade house has been a dream of mine since I started collecting orchids a few years ago, and I'm so excited to show you that we've actually done it. This is the first time I've ever built something like this, so in today's video I'd love to share with you the trials and tribulations of building the shade house. Alright, so we're inside the shade house now, your very first look. We're still kind of figuring out exactly where to put everything, but I'll give you a little tour if you stay around till the end. So the shade house that we ended up getting is a Grow Right shade house from the Garden Superstore online. We did quite a lot of research when we were looking to get one, and we obviously didn't want one that was too big because we are still renting. You might think we're absolutely insane having built this structure in a rental, and sometimes I think we're a little bit insane too, but here we are. But this particular shade house, we really liked how it's kind of a mesh on the walls. You can kind of see the walls and the roof are all like little mesh, which basically means you can hang things anywhere and sit things anywhere and secure them on really tight. The size we ended up getting is a 3 meter deep by 2.925 meters wide, to be specific. It's kind of an odd measurement, but that's what it is. And it's the smallest Grow Right shade house that you can get on their website. But we kind of stepped it out before we purchased it and thought it would be a good size to fit basically everything that we have outdoors and give us a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to getting more orchids, which of course we have to do. And we've got black 50% shade cloth all over it, and we also added Solarweave, which wasn't included in the package, but we asked if they could make some Solarweave for us to put on the roof, which they have done, which is fantastic. I also just wanted to give you a quick personal update that you might have already noticed. I have braces now, which is kind of happy, kind of sad. This is the second time I've had braces in my life. So I definitely keep catching myself in the mirror and in photos and even in the viewfinder of the camera and thinking that I look like I'm about 13 years old again. So I'm still super self-conscious about them. So I'm sorry if I'm talking kind of differently, but hopefully I start to get a handle on it soon. I've only had them for a few weeks now, so still getting used to them, but yes, there we go. So if you're looking at my teeth, that's what's going on. It's just braces. So yes, back to the shade house. The shade cloth itself, we had a couple of options. You could choose black or green. We ended up choosing black. It's not really the most important reason, but the first reason I'll say is I prefer the look of the black shade cloth to the green shade cloth. The green shade cloth just looks a bit in my opinion. Like, obviously it's still fine and it does really well and it's not ugly or anything, but I just kind of preferred the look of black. But also, more importantly, you can still get really good flowering and really good growth with a black shade cloth as well. Also, it's quite windy this afternoon, so I hope that my mic isn't picking that up too much for you. And as I just mentioned, the Solarweave. So if you don't know what Solarweave is, if you've never heard of it, it's basically a durable UV stabilized polyethylene based fabric that is often used in things like greenhouses. It has excellent light transmission, strength and puncture resistance, and a lot of people use it because it creates a bit more of a controlled growing environment, particularly for plants like orchids, because it adds sort of a roof that gives extra protection from the rain and the cold while still allowing enough light for growth and flowering, which is important. So when we ordered the shade house, it was about a 6 to 8 week lead time, I want to say, before it actually arrived. So we used that time to sort of choose exactly where we wanted to put it, which in our garden, it's decent size, but there's not heaps of places that you would put the shade house necessarily. We're on quite a sloped block where we are, and the more sloped the block, the trickier it is going to be to level the place where you want to put the pad for the shade house. So we chose somewhere semi-exposed where it would get as much direct sunlight as possible, because that's obviously optimal for growing conditions for orchids. You want the shade house to basically be in direct sun with the shade cloth over the top. But in our place, we've got quite a few large trees and a big rock wall, beautiful rock wall, but blocks a lot of light beside me. So we've kind of situated it in the only spot that it really was going to work. That's the only way I can describe it. It gets a lot of morning sunlight, but right now it's the afternoon, so there's kind of shade above me, but it is still quite bright in here. It's probably hard to tell through the camera, but it's hopefully, fingers crossed, hopefully enough light for the orchids to still bloom. So we basically started by measuring out the area and staking the corners with little wooden stakes, and we used builder's line to sort of mark in between the stakes so we could start to visualize the position of the shade house. Once you've staked out the edges, you're meant to measure corner to corner to check that it's square, and then start digging your trenches for the sleepers. However, we had a few difficulties with this, I think partly because it's on a bit of a slope where we've put the actual shade house. It was very tricky to get the measurements exactly right, so we ended up scrapping the idea of the pegs and just roughly marking it out and placing the first sleeper down. The sleepers that we got were from Bunnings, and they were 200 mil wide by 50 mil deep by 3000 mil long, or 3 meters long, which was nice and easy because the 3 meters was the length of the shade house, so 2 of which we didn't have to cut down at all, which was fantastic. There were only 2 sleepers that we had to cut down to the 2.925 meter length. In order to start leveling the area, I used a pick to start digging into the ground and loosening up some of the soil, and raked it down to the corners on the left hand side of your screen, which was the lower section, to try and bring it up to level. This was actually quite tricky as our block has a lot of sandstone on it, and that big rock wall that I mentioned is on the right hand side of your screen at the moment. So the ground was very solid, very rocky and very sandy, so it took quite a lot of digging to get the job done. When we got close enough, we dropped in that first sleeper that you can see, and then made sure that was level before moving on to the second one. Once the first sleeper was level, we carried up the second one, popped it roughly in place, and did a lot of tweaking to sort of get that second one up to level. Before moving on to the third sleeper, we grabbed a set square and just made sure that that corner was roughly square to help guide us as to where to put the next sleeper. A lot of this, as I said, it's meant to be one and done. You dig the trenches, drop them in, and you're good to go. But we spent a lot of time trying to level it. It took a lot longer than anticipated, but it's really important to definitely get this step right and make sure that everything's level, that everything's the right size, the right length, the right width, and the pad is perfect before building the shade house. Because if you have any issues with the pad and the size, or it's not level or anything like that, then you're going to be in big trouble when you put the structure on it. And I tell you what, we're already ready to have to move this pad for when we move eventually to our next rental, or hopefully we can buy one day. But you know, when we move, we know that we're probably going to have to pack this up and take it with us, and it's going to be a lot of work. So if you can avoid it, I would definitely get it right the first time, and only move it if you really have to, like us. Once we dug the trenches for all the other sleepers, everything was in place and square, then it was time to start screwing them all into place. Make sure you've definitely got timber screws when you're screwing them in as well. Then we use these corner star picket brackets to ensure that everything stayed square and stayed in position. We didn't concrete it in because, as I said, we are renting, but you definitely could if you own the place and you know that the shade house is going to be there either forever, that would be nice, or just for a very long time. Concreting would just add that little bit of extra security that it's definitely not going to slip and slide around at all, so it can withstand the test of time. Next, we hammered the star pickets into the brackets to secure the structure in place and secure it to the ground. We also used these star picket post brackets for the centers of each of the boards, just for a little bit of extra added support. So we had 4 corner brackets and then 1 bracket in the center of each of the sleepers as well. We then spent a little bit of time leveling the inside of the pad a bit more before we placed a thin layer of gravel along the inside of the sleepers. We added some ag pipe in for drainage, which you can also just get from Bunnings or your local hardware store. And we placed one end of that ag piping actually exiting the bottom of the pad, so underneath the sleepers at the highest point, if that makes sense. Then we basically just coiled it in a loop to help the water drain out from underneath the shade house or underneath the pad every time we water the orchids. So it just helps with a little bit of extra drainage so that all your water isn't just sitting there and then eventually causing a bit of a shade house landslide. That wouldn't be ideal. So add in some ag piping to help with that. We then used weed matting, or what's also called filter fabric, over the top of the ag piping and all over the base of the shade house, basically for a little bit of filtration from where the gravel is going to be as well, but also obviously to stop weeds, which is why it's called weed matting, because it will mean no weeds will grow up from underneath the gravel, which will make it look nice and beautiful and pretty, and it will be much easier to maintain as well. We tucked this in over the top of all the ag pipe around the edges and then put a layer of gravel on the top to hold it down. And that was basically our first day done, because as you can see from the clips I just showed you, it did get quite dark. It took a lot longer than what we'd thought it was going to take, so definitely don't do this in the late afternoon like we did. Start off a little bit earlier in the day day if you want to get it done in one go. The next day we just continued to fill the pad with gravel. We used 14mm loose blue metal that we got from Flower Power. We looked at getting bags of gravel, but it was just going to work out so much cheaper to get a truck to deliver it in bulk. We ended up ordering 2 tons of the blue metal, which sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but when we worked it out, we were going to need basically 1.5 tons at least to fill the pad to be level and fill it right to the top of the sleepers, which was the look we were going for. And we also wanted a little bit of extra gravel just to fill in some little areas around the garden as well. So yes, 2 tons is what we ordered. And because we had to use a lot of dirt to level the shade house, it meant in the center it was quite shallow. There wasn't much dirt in there to fill it. Whereas if you're on more of a level ground, you pretty much should only need to dig out trenches for the sleepers, and that's it. So you might end up needing less gravel than what we did, just so you know, so you don't go ordering 2 tons and then comment being like, I have so much excess gravel. Just see roughly how much you need for your own shade house. And then we just continued to do wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow of gravel to fill the shade house. This was heavy work. You can't really see from the video, but we've got quite a slope down on the left-hand side of your screen to the front of the house where the gravel was dumped on the driveway. So every time I brought a wheelbarrow load up, it was a lot of pushing and lifting and hard work. So I've got some good muscles now, which is a plus. And here is the finished pad for the shade house, looking fresh, filled to the top and leveled perfectly. In all seriousness, I'm really glad we took the time to make it perfect, make sure everything was level and check it as we went, because you really do want a good foundation before you then build your structure. It's also probably worth mentioning you don't actually have to necessarily build a pad for the shade house. You can just plonk it straight on the grass, but we really wanted the added drainage of having the pad, and it also means that every time you water, you're not sort of walking around on the grass and then it eventually turning muddy and sloshy and yucky. And another plus is it adds an extra layer of protection from bugs and pests as well, because you don't have creepy crawlies necessarily all over the ground. It kind of confines it a little bit more. So yeah, it's not necessary, but it's a little bit of an added extra if you want to go down that route. Next was to put together the actual structure for the shade house. So this is possible with just 2 people, but I would definitely recommend if you've got friends or family or anyone who's willing to help, it's definitely worth having maybe at least 3 people, if not 4 people, to help you out, as it does get quite wobbly. You can see here that I'm trying to hold it and Josh is trying to hold it. And because each of the walls are 3 meters long and they're quite heavy because they're galvanized steel, as soon as it starts to wobble, it just goes. And I tell you what, there were a few injuries in the making of the shade house. Blood, sweat and tears went into this. So be as careful as you possibly can be and get more people if you have them around. The shade house itself was delivered on a pallet in pieces. So it came with 4 walls, the roof was in 2 parts, the shelves and the door wings as well. So everything was all separate, kind of flat packed in a way. Each panel is held together with galvanized staples that are fitted using the netting clips or the netting clip pliers that are provided. The shade house came with 1,000 netting clips and we used all of those 1,000 clips. I cannot believe I'm saying that, but we used a ton of clips and ended up having to go to Bunnings and get another packet of clips to finish off all the shade cloth eventually. So definitely be sparing with your clips. Once you start clipping the 2 walls together, it eventually stands and holds itself up so you can add the other walls. This is quite fiddly and time consuming at the start, and I would definitely recommend wearing some gardening gloves if you're the person holding the pieces, as they are quite sharp on the edges. I don't know if I'm just weak, but I definitely cut myself a few times. So again, be careful when you're doing this, and definitely wear protective footwear and probably long pants if you can. I was in shorts and my legs are covered in bruises and scratches and scars from doing this. So long pants, steel cap boots is the way to go. Once all the walls are roughly clipped together, it stands by itself. So we put a few clips on each of the walls to hold them together, and when it was standing by itself, we went back and clipped every second square. I believe you can also get powered versions of the netting pliers that we had, and that would save a ton of time. So if you have the budget and you want to get one of them, definitely invest in one, because it would probably at least halve the time that we spent clipping each of the tiny netting clips onto each of the squares. We'll probably keep that in mind and maybe invest in one next time we're going to rebuild this. All right, so we're on to the third day now, and we have some helpers. Our beautiful friends were staying with us and kindly offered to help us build the shade house. So yeah, the poor things, we really put them to work. They spent this next entire day with us putting it together, but very, very grateful. So thank you so much to them. The next thing that we secured were the door wings either side of the inside of the doorway, and then it was onto the roof. So we chose a gable roof as opposed to a flat roof. One, because I really like the shape of the gable roof with a little peak on there. I think it looks really cute. But two, and probably more importantly, it gives you a bit more room and height and structural support to hang orchids like the Vandas or any type of hanging orchid. Putting it together was a little bit more difficult than we anticipated. You basically slot in the gable bar at one side, and then we figured out after some time of trying to get the other side in, you've actually got to really pull down on the gable bar and bend the mesh in order for it to be able to fit into the other side. So by the time we did the second gable bar and the third gable bar, we figured out you have to kind of pre-bend it before putting them in. Once they're in, they each overhang a little bit, and you cut off the top of the door wings in line with the gable bar. We had to stop halfway through doing this to go and actually buy proper wire cutters, as the little ones that we already had in a King Chrome kit were not strong enough, because what you're cutting is galvanized steel and it's hella strong. So definitely get some good wire cutters. That'd be one of my tips. Then we roughly secured all of the gable bars with a bit of builder's line to hold them up in order to be able to attach the roof. So we attached one piece of the roof at a time. We brought it into the center of the roof and clipped in the middle and on the corners of the wall to hold it in place, and repeated this on the other side. Then we clipped all the way along the center to hold the roof pieces together, and we also used the wire that was provided as a little bit of extra support by securing it around the top of the roof to the top of the inside of the walls. And cue the clipping montage, because I think we spent probably about the next 2 hours just putting clips on everything to make sure it was perfectly together. And that is basically the structure itself up, and it's onto the shelving. So this shade house came with the shelves, which I thought was really good. A few of the other ones we were looking at, you had to buy shelves as an addition to the shade house. So I thought it was kind of cool that it came with them. There's basically two sets of shelves that you can see behind me, and they're kind of tiered. So the top shelf is a little bit skinnier. My goodness, this wind is picking up. The top shelf was a little bit skinnier than the bottom shelf, so it kind of works well for positioning and also for watering. We went along one side at a time, clipping every second square again, and the shelves kind of overlap a tiny bit on the edges for a little bit of added support, which is good. We then clipped on the chains that also came with the shade house. And when you're clipping them on, my only tip would be make sure you pull it nice and taut, or have someone lifting the shelf a tiny bit so that when you let it go, it's nice and tight and isn't sagging. But also make sure that it's not so tight that it's lifting up the shelf higher than what it should be. Once all the shelves were in and the actual structure was complete, we could finally screw in the structure to the sleepers using these U-clips. And then we got to a little bit more of an exciting bit, which was actually being able to put some orchids in the shade house. Now, normally you wouldn't do this until all the shade cloth and everything was installed, but we were going away the following day after we did this. So we wanted to get some of them in as soon as we could so that they could be watered properly and get proper airflow again. So here's a little sneak peek after the first, I believe it was 4 days of work. It wasn't 4 full days of work, but it was definitely 4 separate days that we put towards building the structure. So at this point, it was already a lot longer than what I thought it was going to take, but definitely worth it. So now we fast forward a couple of days and we've installed the front and the back shade cloth. We actually did this quickly before we went away on a short holiday so that the orchids that we'd put into the shade house weren't going to get scorched while we were away. And the shade cloth came pre-cut in 3 separate pieces. So it had one for the front, one for the back, and then the roof and sides was in one big piece. When you're clipping it up, we started with the front, clipped the top section to the peak of the roof, went down along the roof every second square, pulling it taut as we went, then down one side, down the other side, and all the way along the bottom. Make sure you pull it as tight as possible each time you clip. That will help you get a really nice front. Oh, I forgot to say there's also a piece for the door. That's a separate piece. Then we did the same with the back and clipped off all the excess after we went. Make sure to keep the excess as well, because there were there was quite a lot, and that would be really good if we ever have to patch the shade cloth. So definitely don't throw that in the bin because it could prove to be very valuable if you need it. And then it was onto the Solarweave. So with the Solarweave, there was really no instructions that came with the Shadehouse. Even the little instruction manual that it came with wasn't really an instruction manual. It was kind of, you know, a given of how to put it together. And don't get me wrong, it's not that difficult to put this together, but because it doesn't normally come with the Solarweave, that was an addition we had asked for. There was obviously nothing to do with how to put it on, where to put it on, what to do. So we kind of made this next little bit up as we went along. So let me know if we got it right or wrong in the comments below, because I would love to know. I really hope we didn't get it wrong. But it came in 2 pieces, and we basically started by heat welding it together, as this helped to make it really watertight, so that when the 2 pieces are on the roof and it rains, no rain is going to sort of seep through underneath and then get into the shade house. So when you apply heat to the actual Solarweave material, it welds it or melts it together. So in order to do this, one of us held the Solarweave nice and flat against a little plank of wood to make sure that there were no crinkles in it, while the other one went along with the heat gun and warmed up the Solarweave material. It's also important as it heats up to really press it down so that it welds together. And you'll notice if you do this that the Solarweave material does shrink a little bit when it's hot. So you don't want to keep the heat on there too long once it starts to warm up, because it will shrink quite rapidly. So try and heat it as evenly as possible while one person is sort of flattening it along and making sure that there's as little creases as possible. Also, if you're the person pressing the Solarweave together, please wear thick gloves or gardening gloves, something to protect your hands, because it is hot when it is heated with that heat gun. I know that kind of goes without saying, but just be careful. Once it was all heat welded together, we then carefully lifted it up over the top of the roof and clipped along the roof on one side to start. We folded it up under the roof overhang so that it kept its nice little shape, and secured the top and front down the length of the roof, and then cut off the excess. We then repeated this at the back of the shade house, and I think we roughly secured every 4th or 5th square. We basically just tried not to clip the Solarweave too much, as obviously the holes that you make in it are permanent. So we tried to clip it as little as possible while still making sure it's secured nicely and doesn't flap around in the wind. And you'll notice it hangs over slightly at the sides, but not at the front and the back. Kind of for aesthetics, kind of for practicality, but we thought at least if it has a little bit of an overhang on the sides, that will help to keep a bit of rain out. It's obviously not going to stop it if it's torrential rain. The rain will still get through, but it will hopefully be enough to protect the orchids a little bit more than if it was just shade cloth on the roof. And now it's time for the top and the sides shade cloth. So we carefully raised this over the roof. It did take a little bit of time because I'm so short and our ladders aren't that big, because we didn't want to pay for big expensive ladders. They're more like steps than ladders. But once we got it over the top, we did our first clip at the front of the shade house at the very top center of the roof, and overlapped it by about 5 centimeters down the front shade cloth. I found it best to clip one side at a time of the shade cloth so that you can get as much of the sort of ripples or bubbling out of it as possible and keep it nice and taut against the sides of the structure. And yes, there we have our finished shade house. I think it looks amazing. I think, you know, if I toot my own horn, I think we've done really well for a first time. It wasn't really difficult to put together. It was just very fiddly and a lot of trial and error as you go along. And if I was to do it all over again, which one day we definitely will when we move house, I would definitely buy a powered netting clip thingy. I don't know what you call it, but a powered version of the netting clip pliers, and definitely some taller ladders so there's not as much dangling and reaching over when you're trying to clip like the roof and things together. That would definitely have been very helpful. Woo, it is quite breezy this afternoon, but hopefully you can see I'm surrounded by vandas and lots of things hanging from the roof. It's mainly vandas. We've got Ansalia africana up here as well, and a couple of dendrobiums. The other thing I'll say that the Solarweave helps with as well is raising the temperature in here a little bit more. So anything that's warm or hot growing is also positioned higher, closer to the roof, where it's a little bit brighter and has a little bit of added warmth. All right, I'll just turn you around this way. So the door, the front of the shade house is right in front of me. We have a lot of our encyclias over this side and our big dendrobiums as well. And then obviously right above my head, we've got quite a few vandas. So this part of the shade house probably gets the most sunlight from what we've found so far for the longest part of the day as well. So this is why all our big sun-loving, warmth-loving things are right up the front here. Over in this corner, I'll just stand out of your way so you can kind of see. We have more dendrobiums, cattleyas, a few more vandas, and the Ensalia africana that I pointed to before. That's all over here, so more highlight stuff. Over this side, it starts becoming, you're a little bit closer to the rock wall, so it's a little bit more cool and kind of a bit shadier slightly earlier in the day over this side. So we've got a lot of our Sarcochilus, Docrylias at the back there. Move you around here and we've got Zygopetalums, Cymbidiums all the way along the bottom as well that you probably can't see down there. More vandas hanging above us. And then a lot of the Oncidiums and things are over this side as well. But everything is kind of still learning where it wants to be, and we're kind of still learning the ways of the shade house. So nothing is probably in its perfect and final spot, but everything is in, which is super exciting. So yeah, that's basically everything I've got for you today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope that if you've never built a shade house before, hopefully this has been a little bit helpful, somewhat kind of educational would be nice. Well, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed today's video. Please give me a like and press subscribe if you would like to see more of my orchid content, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!